we can get going. So welcome everyone. I think we've got a couple of people who have joined us already. So this session is going to be all about adopting innovation beyond MedTech and thinking about new ways of delivering healthcare today. So what I'm really hoping that we're going to do is be able to take the audience and the discussion on a really nice journey through from right at the early stage of innovating, at the idea stage, through to developing a product in a company, and then actually getting that taken up and used at scale. Just very quickly on my introductions, I'm Harry Thurkettle. I'm the head of operations for MyM Health. I'm a doctor by background, and then got really excited by technology in healthcare and what it could do for patients. So much to the disgust of my wife and my mum, I left my surgical job about 6 years ago. I've been with MyM Health for about 5 years, and we basically make apps which help people look after long-term conditions better and allow clinicians to remotely look after their patients. We're working with about 60% of the CCGs in England now, so we've got the scars to show for what getting an innovation adopted looks like, and some experience there. So that's me. So we're going to go around. We've got a question for each of our panelists to get started. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves and then ask them a question. We'll go around, and then if anyone in the audience has questions, please put it into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll have plenty of time for a good roundtable with questions from the floor towards the end of the session. So if we can start with Simon. Simon, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, great. Simon Jenner, I'm a partner at Million Labs, or M Labs. We are a no-code investor, so we invest into early stage tech startups that are building using no-code, which is kind of a relatively new phenomenon, but it kind of does what it says on the tin: develop apps with mobile or web, etc., using no-code at all. It's a very visual drag and drop. What you see, what you get type of approach to it, and we've seen literally hundreds of thousands, well, we're into millions now of new startups created using no code. So it's a very sort of new area, and we're probably one of the few worldwide investors that are specifically targeting no code. So yeah, that's what we do. Fascinating stuff, and hopefully really opens the floor for people without that tech background to get good ideas going. And so I suppose nicely into your question then. So what advice, Simon, would you give to someone who's just starting out, new or early stage founder, about positioning is most likely to lead to it being adopted? Yeah, sure. Yeah, and a great question. And it's obviously the kind of question that all startups or all potential entrepreneurs and founders kind of are faced with first. What do I do? What's a good idea and what's not a good idea? And I guess our sort of guiding finger is that you need to solve a problem, and that sounds blooming obvious, but you need to solve a problem that that has a pain to pay for, ultimately. And then obviously in the medtech and health tech space, actually there's lots of those, and so you're in an amazing space for doing that, because people in this market generally for most things. So it's a really great starting place. There are other markets. If you came to us and said, I want to build a new social media platform, I'd be like, that's a challenge. Not impossible, but that's a massive challenge. But we're seeing stuff all the time coming across our door, and like yourself, Harry, the beauty of no code is that non-tech founders can now create apps and create without having to go raise a lot of money to go and hire a tech person to come and help them deliver it. So that's really changing the game here, and opening up the market to literally anybody, whether it be a doctor that's got expertise and got obviously the market expertise and the clinical expertise, etc., can now produce an app. We've just had an eye doctor, a South African eye doctor, come through one of our programs, and is generating an app. We've seen stuff for eczema and so forth. So we're seeing a lot of stuff being created that probably previously would just not have got off the ground. Mm-hmm. So I think first thing is go solve a problem that people will pay for. And two is try and validate your idea as early as possible without building stuff. No code does allow you to build like little stuff and stuff really quickly, but try and validate it first to prove that there is a market. because nobody wants to waste, you don't want to give up a good career to go and waste 6 months, 12 months, 18 months of your life and a boatload of money to find that nobody wants your product. So there are lots of things that you can do early on, whether that's talking to people, interviewing, polls, surveys, little mini tests, what we call experiments in the lab. And the medical industry's, all for that type of thing and understands that kind of approach. Is let's do lots of little experiments to prove out our assumptions before we go full blaze into building our thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Simon. And one of the things which is very close to my heart, and I'm involved with, in part with Professor Tony Young to help set that up, and that's I'm a mentor on that, and that's the biggest advice I give to people. I think you've alluded to it there. Make sure problem valid is absolutely critical. Solving must-have problems, not nice-to-have problems, and don't waste anything. And waste in this sense, build stuff that people don't want. So, really exciting. And offline, it'd be interesting to talk. I don't know if you've been involved in that program, but it'd be great to follow up on that. So thank you for that, Simon. So, okay, I see there's quite a few people who have joined. So just to reiterate, if anyone in the audience has questions, there's a chat function. Pop your questions in there. We're going to be going around all of the panelists, and then there'll be time for open questions towards the end of the session. So please put any questions that you've got for any of the panelists in there. So we're going to come to Alex next. So Alex, would you mind just doing your introduction?
Yeah, of course. Good to be here. Thanks, Harry. Alex Clearlenson. So I am investment manager at Angels Then Funding. So one of the largest angel networks. We've got around 18,000 angels. So really focused on early stage startups, looking to connect high net worth angels, VCs, family offices with the best sort of early stage. And obviously, a lot of those are MedTech. We're all around the UK, so we're not just London centric. So we spend a lot of time out of the UK as. That's just a quick intro.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, there's a tiny bit of lag, but that's fine. Just on my side. So Alex, you would have seen lots of early stage companies, I expect, in your career. Looking at it from the investor side, what do you? Any signs or any signals that you think, particularly in the medtech space, that an idea's got legs and might likely be adopted?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing to mention, obviously, for whoever's starting up a medtech startup out there is, I think on a fundamental level, I think the early signals are very similar to what you see in any startup. Is there a team there that's going to be able to deliver the idea? Is the market size there? So Simon's already mentioned market. So is there actually a market there to adopt it? And then actually, is the idea strong? Is it novel, or is it an improvement? Something's already out there. I think those are sort of three key factors to look for, and things that we look for before we look at sort of go further. But I think obviously medtech businesses are slightly different to your sort of generic, what I would say, SaaS business, or your generic sort of B2C product business. A lot of the time, there's a lot more IP involved. So we really look at IP in these businesses as well, and is there going to be IP there that people can protect? So, for example, we've been working very closely with a business that's using AI to detect disease. Really interesting business, but the really powerful bit around that business is they own the data that's used in the AI. So businesses like that, I think you can sort of see there's a strong market there, the idea's there. They own the data, and it's going to get adoption. So I think those are probably the key factors. I think other factors are what we look for, just from personal experience, is traction. Obviously, it's a lot easier to get traction if you're selling a product. So it's not just sales. Early traction can be grants, which are fantastic for a lot of medtech businesses, and LOIs. So just showing that there is a market out there. So we look for LOIs as well, just showing that someone actually wants to purchase what someone is producing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, just anyone uninitiated in the audience, an LOI.
Oh, letter of intent. Yes, sorry. Acronyms. I need to. Acronyms. Always stop me. Never use acronyms. Yes, absolutely. Letter of intent. And a letter of intent being as simple as someone just saying, yes, this is something that we would use when you produce it. It doesn't have to be anything complex. It's just essentially, confirmation that someone's going to be there to purchase once you finish that development.
Sound advice. And anyone out there who's working in the NHS is always fond of a good TLA. Yeah, really useful. James, would you mind giving us your introduction?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm James Alford. So I'm currently a senior director at GSK, the pharmaceutical company. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. I'm in the innovation department there. But as a bit of background, I started at Imperial College London. I sort of read biology and neurobiology. I then sold my soul for the first time to strategy consulting. Did that for a little while, and then ended up going into startup world. So I ended up doing a gut microbiome diagnostics startup with a couple of sort of previous colleagues at Imperial College. We failed on that one. That's fine. We moved forward. That was a good life experience. And then I ended up moving into working with private equity and VC companies, helping them understand, helping their founders and helping their investors matching, but then also trying to find market fit, etc. I ended up moving into this role, so as the sort of innovation director at GSK, around just under 2 years ago now. And our role is Horizon 3 innovation. So we're actually looking at the 5 to 10 year horizon of where healthcare is going to be. And in truth, and this is a heretical statement, I don't really care if GSK is involved in that. I care about what the outcome is at the healthcare level. And I understand that there are stakeholders who deliver that, of which pharmaceuticals are one, healthcare providers, payers, patients, but it's patient-centric. So there's an outcome that we're trying to drive to, and the outcome that we're driving to is something called ambient healthcare. There's lots of things behind that, but trying to understand actually that's where the problem set exists, and how do we get from where we are today to there is the problem we're trying to solve.
Perfect, and a fascinating background. I hope you failed fast. That's the most important thing.
We did in 9 months. We failed in 9 months. It was
fine.
That
is good news. You retained some of your, hopefully. So James, fascinating background, and really keen to hear your response to this. And so from that, high level and potentially from those larger organizations, looking at it, how do you think about problems and identify problems that need solving, and then profiling the solutions which may fit to them?
Yeah, exactly. So I actually, a lot of the group that we sort of run basically tries to view it like a VC or a private equity house. We set a load of thesis, right? We say, here's where we think the future of healthcare is going to be. That's our hypothesis. And then what are the assumptions? So very scientific method. What are then the assumptions for that to be true? And there's things around like, I'm not going to try not to use too many acronyms here, but it's a total addressable market, all those sort of things to understand. And how big is that problem for who? And then we kind of reverse backwards. So we do something, this is all acronyms, apologies, it's the consultant in me, but it's the basically future back strategy. So we've set a future state we want to exist. And a lot of people we speak to are people that we speak to a lot to, like Andreessen Horowitz, Kostler, NEA, etc. And the person actually I really enjoy listening to at the moment is Vinod Kostler, so the founder of Kostler Ventures. Exactly the same principle. Where are we heading? And that's where the problem sets are. Because if you're looking, now look, I'm coming at it from a very specific angle, right? And if I had to put money on the table today, it'd be very different from if I'm putting money on the table over 5 years, in truth. But there are some problems that don't change. Some jobs to be done, essentially, is the word. They don't change, especially around the human. We all need to get better into predictive health. We need to get into preventative health. And in truth, if we do our job right, people won't get disease. Like there's a huge, and this is the heretical part that I spend in GSK saying, if we do our job today, we may not have a business in oncology, right? That's one of our biggest product lines, which is exactly where we should be. It's exactly where we should be. We shouldn't be getting to this point with, now there are some things we won't get rid of, some infectious diseases, etc. And we're in an ever escalating arms race with, for example, coronaviruses or influenza or bacteria and those sort of things. But things that are addressable with behavior and economic outcomes, we can affect that. So we look for problems around that. And so where I talk about the ambient healthcare, for that to be true, as I said before, it's about predicting. So the whole exome of the human being. What is your metabolome, your transcriptome, your genetics, your epigenetics, all your, so we can actually predict the likelihood of you getting a disease. And then we can say, okay, well, non-pharmaceutical intervention, how may we do that? There's a lot of digital therapeutics now. There's a lot of behavioral change that you can affect. I sit separately from GSK on the board of a digital therapeutic company called Bold Health, which is around IBS and IBD, and I'm an investor there. And that's exactly it. A huge number of the diseases that we treat today with pharmaceuticals could be treated non-pharmautically, which would be fantastic, especially in the early triages point. And then it escalates. And so go back to the original question. Well, how do we find those problems? Realize the future state you want that human to be in, and then work out the problems that don't change. So it's around predicting my health, it's preventing my health, and then eventually it's personalized treatment of my health. These are big statements. There's a lot of detail behind them, but that's how, and it's human centered. And I think the biggest challenge for any company, big company in healthcare, whether you're a payer, a provider, a pharmaceutical, a regulator, is we care about our problems. How do we operate? What does our business model look like? We stop caring about, we're solving a problem for a human. Everything else cascades from that.
Fantastic answer, and I get the sense, James, that you and I could have a very long conversation about this. Digital therapeutics, obviously, something my M Health does is very close to my heart, and you really are preaching to the converted. There's we could do with software. It is so important, and a real simple message: start at the end and work backwards. Right, where are you trying to end up, and that will tell you, at least roughly how to get there. So thank you for that. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to move on now to Chris. Chris, would you mind giving us your introduction? Oh, Chris, are you there? Oh, I think we may have lost Chris. No problem. Let's see if he could join back in. It's just me, right? No one else can hear Chris speaking. No, fine. So we'll come back to Chris. Helen, we'll go on to you next instead, if that's okay. Would you mind giving us your introduction, Helen?
No problem, thank you. So I'm Helen Hyland. I'm lead for enterprise and relationships at Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Network. We're one of 15 AHSNs set up across the country as a network. Originally set up by NHS England a few years ago, and our aim really is to support the spread and adoption and testing of innovation across the health and social care landscape in England. In terms of what we do at Yorkshire and Humber AHSN, we have a varied programme. We give direct support to SMEs, innovators, clinical entrepreneurs, industry, etc., in terms of development of their product or their solution, be that MedTech, digital, AI, etc. We do that via a structured support package. We have regular innovation surgeries that you're welcome to attend. And we also run a digital accelerator based in Leeds as well, in Nexus, and that's called Propel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Helen. And, really with that background, what I was really keen, I'm sure you'll have a lot of insight into this through the work of the HSNs, but what do you see as the main barriers to innovations and ideas being adopted, and any advice or thoughts on how to overcome them?
Yeah, I think obviously adoption of innovation is very complex, and multiple different sort of reasons for that complexity. So I would say to anybody that if you are wanting to sort of understand this more or navigate the health and care system, which is complex, then to reach out to your local academic health science network, and we'd be pleased to have a conversation with you and see how we might be able to support you. I think it's been touched on a little bit today already, that I think, in terms of bringing in innovation to market and the future scale up of that, it's really, really important to understand, does this really meet a known need within the system? So, we would always recommend having a look at policy and strategy drivers around the long-term plan, looking at what your local integrated care systems are doing, to really understand what is the pull and the context from the NHS at any particular time. And then we're always stressing around, obviously, evidence. So commissioners, procurement managers, clinicians, if they're to be interested in your solution, they're going to want to understand what the evidence is, essentially. So we work with SMEs and innovators. We can support with real-world validation studies, for example, within a real-life trust setting or CCG, so that we really understand what's the impact of your innovation on the existing pathway. And that will give us really insightful intelligence around the impact upon the workforce, staff, clinical outcomes, etc. We also do work around health economics evaluation to understand return on investment, and to really help you build up your proof of value and value proposition. We also emphasize consistently the importance of having clinical champions for new products. So again, we can help with those sorts of conversations. And particularly when we think about digital and AI, the impact and the importance of the user experience. So how your product looks and feels to an end stage user, be that a clinician or if it's a patient-facing solution, they're all really important things to think about. I think increasingly we're obviously seeing technology in the AI space because of the impact of COVID, and there's been this huge seismic shift to remote care, virtual wards, care at home, patient-facing self-management technologies, and this is definitely a sustainable direction of travel now. And all of those come with different challenges around information governance, data sharing, how to procure, how to get yourself on a relevant procurement framework, for example. There's lots of different complexities on a case-by-case basis. So we really would welcome having a chat with anybody who wants to understand more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Helen. I don't think Chris has managed to get back in. So let's open a little bit to the floor now. So I'll pause for a second. Do any of the panelists have any questions they want to ask of each other or with me? Anyone want to go? Or I've written down a couple of things which I can go through. So okay, so let's keep it moving. I noticed there was one question which was put in the chat from Anne. Anyone else in the audience wants to ask us some questions, and please put something in the chat. But this was to, and I see you've answered in the chat, but I think it's a good one. So let's talk about it a little bit, which is how does GSK go about horizon scanning and understanding the future of where healthcare. And he said hair care then. Pretty sure you're not looking at the future of hair care.
It'd be quite useful. Yeah, it'd be useful for me.
Absolutely. The future of healthcare and where we're heading. So thoughts on that, James, and then we'll open that to the rest of the panelists as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, probably Simon and Alex, quite similar viewpoint of we try and take an investor lens on it. Because we're investing time, potentially money, in these things. So whilst we're not taking, my group doesn't take stakes in the companies. It takes, well, it provides cash flow to a lot of startups who are trying to do a lot of these things. So we take an investor approach, which is very much thesis driven. But how do we come to that thesis, I guess, is the difficult thing. And we use what we call signals of change. So it's not necessarily trends, because there's a lot of trends that are ever moving. Some accelerate, some slow down, some are perpetual. But what we're looking for is those slight changes in the trends around individuals, which are kind of signaling, wait a minute, something's happening here. And we tend to sort of focus on the extreme ends of them. So, have you got biohackers who are like gene editing in a hotel suite by themselves, right? Or have you got people who are doing the complete opposite, who are never ever going to vaccinate themselves, right? We can agree rightly or wrongly about people's opinions on it, but it's interesting from a behavioral perspective what that's signaling. And essentially where we capture that from is, I'm a bit lazy, right? So we go to people who are already capturing it. So we're going to the investors, right? We're going to startup founders who have got great thesis of futures. And we say, okay, well, why do you believe that? And then it's kind of signals, okay. And then we either agree with them or we form our own opinion. When we form that opinion, we then try and validate it. So we go to the usual market research sides of things, whether it's sort of customer panels, or we go to clinicians, or we go to whoever else we need to go to and have that conversation. But it's the other side of it is, if you really I don't necessarily believe in the whole Peter Thiel 0 to 1 side of things necessarily, but it's trying to, if you really want to disrupt or at least get ahead of everybody, you're not trying to just catch up. And I'm taking it from the perspective of a big corporate. Spend a lot of time catching up with competitors. Problem is that you're very much like, okay, what's my competitor doing? One step behind. What's my competitor doing? One step behind.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to, again, sorry for using buzzwords, but leapfrog other people and go to the full, it's like, what is that problem that no one else sees exist yet, but you believe is going to exist, right? So let's take, for a perfect example, personalized medicine. Okay, everyone's like, oh, personalized medicine. Okay, well, what does hyper-personalized medicine actually look like? Well, that looks like essentially probably a lot of infusion therapies. Okay, well, you have to go to, are we going to be saying that everyone's going to a hospital environment to be infused with CAR-T or CRISPR therapies? Probably not. They're going to be delivered at your home. Okay, well, then there's going to be if we know in the next 5 years, at home, hyper-personalized therapies are going to exist in the home, what's the safety that's going to be required to deliver that in the home? How are you going to get medical help, clinical help, that distributed in a virtual environment? Are you expecting everyone to actually put a needle in their arm to infuse these therapies? What's the supply chain to that? That's how we start to really get down to, okay, where are the problems? So you start with this future state, validate it with everyone, and then try and work out through all the problems and the assumptions that you've got to go figure out, and eventually roadmap it and say, okay, wait, today here, this is how do we solve this problem over time? Sorry, long answer, but
no, fantastic. And I think it's so important is that, there's you've mentioned about and developing insights, right? If you can find an insight which no one has yet, and then you can position your solution around deliver in a certain way, that whether it's enacting behavioral change amongst your user group, or whether it's just focusing in on a slightly different aspect of the problem, you can have multiple solutions trying to do roughly the same thing, but the one who has that level of insight is often going to be the one that surges in front. So I think, fantastic answer. Let me just pause there. We'll come to Chris in a second. Let's see if you've rejoined us. Hi, Chris. But I'll just if anyone else wants to come in on that question, any of the other. No,
I suppose I was going to say, from our point of view, we don't get too hung up on the big picture that James was talking about, and I guess that's just a difference in the level that we're investing at and where we're investing, etc. I think when you're looking for the big hits, you have to be future, and you have to be looking at the curve and trying to be on that curve as it's rising, as it were. Whereas we're kind of, I guess, an investor of 1,000 cuts. We're going to put small amounts of money into lots and lots of bets and see what happens, because law of statistics and odds and backing the right team and all those other factors will actually see us get some good results. And because we're putting small amounts in, actually we can have smaller wins, and that's fine as well. And, let's be honest, not every business, or very few businesses, are unicorns and these big, Ubers, Googles, Facebooks of the world. Most are not that. And we need the ones that are not that, because that's what drives UK PLC. And that's what will drive a lot of this medical tech innovation, will be the small guys that get a certain level and then get purchased and through M&A and all the rest of it. So slightly different approach, but yeah, all heading in the same direction, I think.
Yeah, fantastic, Simon. Thank you for that. And I think that's such an important point as well, right? And this is just as advice to founders out there. Again, going back to that starting the end and working backwards, but for now, thinking about that from a company perspective, what is this going to be your baby, which you're going to grow over the course of 15 years, and then you're going to exit at a unicorn $1 billion valuation? Is it a lifestyle business? Is it something you want to license as a royalty? And that's then going to inform a lot of your early decisions in terms of how you try and structure things. And the market will tell you, right? There will be, the market's a harsh place. So if with your approach, there's kind of a natural selection pressure, to use a slightly Darwinian term, but it will be survival of the fittest and survival of the ones which are really solving the problems for the customers and users. Yeah, no, really, really fascinating insights. Thank you for that. So should we, Chris now? Chris, can you hear us? Yes.
Hi, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes,
as well?
we can. Lovely. Could you give us your introduction?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Apologies for that internet outage. Perils of working at home. So I'm Chris Herbert. I'm Operations Director for Research and Innovation at Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. So I oversee the research delivery infrastructure within the trust that delivers clinical trials at pace and scale across the organisation. So at any one time, we've got about 900 trials open on our portfolio, and generally recruit between 18 to 20,000 people a year into a wide range of clinical trials, from therapeutics through to more observational type studies. And my role, as well as the research side of it, looks at sort of innovation as well. So we've been spinning up some more work around innovation support and how we broker relationships better between businesses and clinical staff over the last couple of years, particularly looking at sort of where are those needs, where are those challenges that we can start sourcing solutions for to bring into the hospital and bring in and pull in through adoption and through need on that front. But also looking at the market, say, oh, there's something really interesting here. Let's introduce it into our clinical services and see how that happens. And the infrastructure we're building, it's not just med devices. We're looking at how we work with cell and gene therapies. We've done quite a few projects in AI and data sharing, and how we're managing to do that to support co-development as well. So it's a really broad function, a really exciting range of things, as you can imagine, seeing through it.
Yeah, no, exciting stuff. And I suppose what I was hoping to get your insight on, Chris, is you can ask many questions in research, right? You can do anything. You can ask any question. How do you think about generating the right evidence, and which can then hopefully lead to an increased likelihood of getting that idea adopted? What sort of questions do you ask, and how do you think about that?
It's about understanding your customer stakeholder matrix. It's about actually who are you trying to sell to. Okay, people say you're selling to the NHS and it's this big monolith. Actually, you can't say it's actually who are the people who are going to help you make the decision along the way. So actually, how are you going to show evidence to each of those groups? So from a clinical perspective, what's your evidence of efficacy? How is it going to be used in the clinic? How are they going to use that? Is it going to be beneficial to patients? And how, from a business management, is this cost effectiveness? I'm not talking about qualities here. They're absolutely meaningless in a hospital setting. What's the impact on my bottom line? What's that cost ratio? Etc. Where are the savings? Where are they falling? Understanding that patient pathway, but also looking on the impact on other corporate functions as well. So actually, is there going to be an informatics, a requirement from the informatics team to do more on this, which is a hidden cost? What's my impact on pharmacy working if it's a drug? And James talked about advanced therapies, cell therapies a moment ago, and the challenge with adoption of those is that they are a complete reinvention in a way of clinical services, interactions with pharmacy, and really collaborative working with industry on them. And there's some great work through the Advanced Therapy Treatment Centre programs across the UK, which are really helping to accelerate adoption there, and lots of lessons coming out of that for other sectors as well, which I'd really urge people to look at. But in terms of evidence generation, itself is, it's what do you need to get through a business case process in a trust. Ultimately, that's what's going to get you there. So high quality evidence. It's not just a small number of case studies on a small number of patients. That isn't really going to cut it. But also looking when you're designing studies, what's your target product profile? What's that patient population you're aiming at? Where's that initial benefit going to be? It might be in a small patient group, but you might get a large element of benefit from that. So that's where you go with it first, and then you can broaden your market out through that going forwards. So really using those TPPs in the development phase to really help shape the offering, shape the trial design, and getting statistically significant outcomes. And then I think there's a piece as well about strategic working with NHS partners as well, and using a small number of demonstrator exemplar sites, but working with them to then collect real world outcomes. What has this done in the real world, in clinical settings, and using data that's being collected in routine hospital settings then to evidence that benefit in care, because that will help take the innovation broader out from one place to another, because you've got that harder evidence then of what really happens outside the trial setting.
Yeah, a fantastic answer, Chris. Thank you so much for that. I think one observation that I've had, and people sometimes fail to appreciate this, I think, at the early stage of the companies, is differentiating between customers and users. And I think, making sure that you if you've got loads of patients, for example, who like using your product and you've done a great job for them, that's fantastic. But if you're hoping to sell to the NHS or to any large healthcare organization, then your customer is the person who's going to sign your check, and making sure that you're covering both bases, I think, is something often people miss. So there's a couple of other things which are kind of high-level themes which I'd like to try and pull out. So we talked a little bit about forming health economic cases, and that being a primary driver. Has anyone want to share any thoughts on approaching that, thinking about it, or any general commentary on how an early stage startup might tackle that problem? Would anyone like to come in on that?
I'll come in there as a starter. Sure. I think for me that it's about understanding the pathway. Where is your innovation fitting in the pathway? Because until you understand that, and not just at high level, this is the disease state, actually, where's your innovation fitting? What's the difference it's going to make? Because when you start understanding that detail and the costs then align through that, so through NHS tariff, you've got a very good idea of what some of the costs associated with care and patient numbers are. But it's by understanding that pathway that you can then start building some of those insights, but also looking around at, where is there expertise out there, not just health economics consultancies, but academic groups working in an area as well that you can work with to do small, proof of principle, initial investigation type projects to really understand what that pathway is looking like, what the costs associated with that, and what your value proposition in that is as well. Because that health economics won't just tell you what the value to your purchaser is, actually it will tell you what your business model. Things that health economically justified prices in that, which means you've got then a matrix to work in terms of your to market price. But it's working with skilled people in the art, very much so, and it's about building that collaboration around the technology.
Yeah, no, perfect. And so just to share a personal experience of that with my mHealth and how we approach that. So that the key word that you mentioned there to me is the pathway and understanding the whole care pathway. And obviously you're coming at it, I think, from the acute, but the wider pathway, looking at community, looking at as well. And the way that we've managed to see some success is by having touch points along that pathway. So, for example, we do quality rehabilitation. We did a randomized control trial, which is non-inferiority, showing that we can deliver the same outcomes with online rehab as you can get in face-to-face. We then backed that up with real-world evidence within a service. So that gave us one route in. But then also we've done other studies looking at medicines utilization, and obviously one of the biggest spends is on inhalers. So we've shown that we can reduce inhaler usage, number one, in terms of reliever inhalers, and also get people using them better. So it's no longer wasted money, which is saving the NHS a lot. And then we also shown that we can reduce unplanned GP consultations with the app. So that allows us to form a comprehensive health economic case behind the app, which then, in our experience of going to commissioners or payer organizations internationally, there's a very compelling case there. So taking that pathway approach and multiple points along it, and then generating the evidence you need at each stage, that's been tremendously helpful for us. I'll just open that to the floor. Would anyone else like to come in on that point?
I've just got a slightly off-center point around that. Is not coming from the industry and being kind of generic. Just listening to that conversation, it might as well have been in French, and I suspect that might be a challenge. And it's not just true of the NHS and these type of bodies; it's true of the Ministry of Defence and all the rest of it. There's a whole different language, and if you're an entrepreneur trying to access that, you almost need an insider to be able to decipher it. And I suspect that's a barrier to innovation for us all. And maybe people like Helen are trying to solve those problems by acting as a doorway into that, and as a translator or something. But it just is an interesting observation from my side.
No, fantastic point. And as doctors will just speak in all sorts of jargon very quickly. We're renowned for that. Anyone else like to come in on that point?
I think your point around tracking sort of key points along a pathway, I think that sounds very similar to a lot of early stage startup journeys. So from pre-seed, seed, again, jargon that probably external entrepreneurs, as Simon's point, probably don't get a handle on. But it sounds like a very similar journey as you sort of try and go from a startup to a scale up. So I think it's sort of a different language for the same journey that people are on, showing there's something there, and then actually showing how do I then scale this and how do I target the right customers. So no, it's interesting to hear a different sort of way that pathway is tracked. Sure,
very good. So I suppose you mentioned a word there, which is something which I wanted to explore, which is scaling, right? Now, the NHS is known for being a huge amount of small organisations under the banner of one very big organisation, and we see, even with my own health, we see lots of pockets of excellent practice, but then trying to get that more widely adopted and to get people delivering what we know is effective care, but scaling that is a big challenge. So would anyone like to come in on the challenges of scaling and how to think about those problems that you might face?
I'll have a quick, so I'll take it from the perspective of the start I set on the board of investing. So digital therapeutics company, actually it matches a little bit with the sort of health economic outcomes, which is when you're scaling, especially in a clinical environment, you're constantly balancing, how do I get in front of as many users as possible to get learnings from experience design and like market fit and the typical sort of non-industry just technology metrics. They're really important, but at the same time build up enough clinical evidence so that when I'm having a conversation with a CCG, or even I'm just going to the NHS app store, I can actually say this is effective, like they've actually done a trial or something. And that's a really hard one for timing to do. And how we've kind of approached it, we're constantly in this balancing act. We've currently got 2 clinical studies now proving efficacy and all, which is fantastic. We had to go to America to do it. Right, so we've got a university, like a UPenn one and a Stanford one, because we couldn't find a UK institution, like a thing to actually help us run a clinical study on a digital therapeutic. It was so hard to navigate, and we have on our board clinicians, we have people who are in the thing, and I think, Simon, it's back to your point, like one, the clinical world speaks a different language, and 2, it is so hard to navigate. And if we look about in America, they've already gone through this curve. They're probably 10 years ahead of us in terms of opening themselves up to understanding how we interact with it. But what I would say is you've got to, at first basis, understand there is actually market, like to fit, like your users validate it. And it's sometimes you've got to say, be really careful about, you are not offering a clinically certified, this is a therapy treatment. You've got to be really careful what you're saying there. Enough that you can then convince someone in the clinical world to actually back you for a trial and prove it, and then find a navigator. And there's loads of people, Helen, you probably know quite a few, Crispy, you'll know a few. Everyone probably knows people who can help you navigate it, but also befriend a clinician. Find someone who can translate in your area and reach out. A lot of people just, clinicians, I've got a lot of very good friends of mine, because most people are working themselves to death as clinicians because they love caring for people, funny enough. And if you can say, actually, I've got something that I think is going to help, could you just every so often join a call? Could you can I have a conversation with you to make sure this works or not? Could you point me to someone who is an expert in this space? They will probably try and help you. That was my view.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And we're nearly at time. Does anyone have 30 seconds or they would like to add to that? No? I suppose one of my observations is we've talked a lot about evidence, we've talked a lot about finance and the positioning of ideas and validation. In terms of adoption and scaling, one of the biggest things that I think is important is looking really at emotional drivers and understanding the humans who are meant to be using your product. So we've found, and I won't name any names or services or anything, but we've found some clinical services who weren't engaging, and we couldn't really understand why. But when we go and speak to them, we found that some of their staff were afraid that essentially we were trying to replace them, right? We've got technology which can do what they can do, but it's much more scalable. But that's not what we're about at all. We want them to use our technology as a tool and deliver the benefit of their experience and medical knowledge to thousands of patients instead of tens. Right, and if we can achieve that, it's not about replacing, it's about enhancing and widening access. But since we had that frank conversation with the team, you know, that I'm thinking of, their usage of the platform has exponentially increased. You know, they're now to patients a year onto the platform, whereas previously they were doing, you know, and just getting that emotional understanding and connection of there was a fear there, which was then preventing action. That was really critical to our success in that instance. So I think we're at time. I think just to say thank you to all of the panel. I think it's been hopefully a really good and interesting discussion. It's been a real pleasure talking with you all. And I think we will leave it there, if that's all right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.